The high plains of Wyoming in 1884 were a lesson in austerity. The land offered little comfort, only a hard, unblinking honesty. It was a place bleached pale as old bone, by a relentless sun in summer, and scoured clean by a wind that carried the taste of ice in winter. The sky was immense, a deep and silent blue that made a man feel like a solitary insect crawling across a vast, empty plate. It was country that stripped a person down to what they were, with no room for pretense or falsehood. Sheriff Caleb Thorne felt the truth of it in his own bones, which ached with the miles. He had been riding for 3 weeks, leaving the greener, more forgiving lands of Colorado behind him. He followed a map drawn from hearsay and rumor, a trail of whispers that led him north, into this emptiness. His horse, a steady buckskin gelding, was as worn as he was. His saddle leather was cracked, his coat was frayed at the cuffs, and the man inside the clothes felt much the same. He was 42 years old, and the years had settled in his face not as softness, but as a series of hard-won lines around his eyes and mouth. He was a man who had seen too much and said too little. He was looking for a ghost, a woman he had sent into this wilderness a year ago, banished from the town of redemption by his own judgment. Her name was Elara Vance. The charge had been theft, a significant sum stolen from the town's most prosperous merchant, Jedediah Croft. The evidence seemed solid, presented by Croft himself with righteous indignation. Witnesses, paid for by Croft as Caleb later learned, had corroborated the story. The town, hungry for a simple answer to a complicated crime, had turned on her, and he, the sheriff, had stood before her and delivered the verdict: banishment. He had given her 3 days to be gone, or face the jail and a federal marshal. He remembered her face in that moment. She had not wept. She had not pleaded. She had simply looked at him with a quiet, measuring gaze. Her eyes, the color of a stormy sky, held not guilt, but a profound and weary disappointment. It was a look that had returned to him in the quiet hours of many nights since. It was the look of a person seeing a man fail a test of character he did not even know he was taking. 6 months later, the truth had unraveled, as truths often do, messily and too late. A disgruntled clerk of Croft's, drunk on whiskey and courage, had confessed the whole scheme. Croft had been embezzling from his own store for years, and the theft had been a fiction to cover his tracks, with Elara Vance chosen as the scapegoat. She was quiet, kept to herself, and had no family to speak for her. She was the perfect victim. The town of redemption had been ashamed. Croft was ruined, his reputation dissolving overnight into a foul mist of deceit. But the town's shame did nothing to fix the wrong that had been done. It was a collective sin, but Caleb felt it as a personal failing. The law was meant to be a shield for the innocent, and he had used it as a sword against one. The badge on his chest, once a source of quiet pride, now felt as heavy and cold as a river stone. So he had unpinned it, left it on his desk for the deputy, and set out to find her. He was not sure what he would do when he did. An apology felt like a hollow, useless thing, a small coin offered for a debt that could never be repaid. But it was the only thing he had to give. He had to stand before her again, meet that steady, disappointed gaze, and speak the truth he had failed to see before. He topped a low rise and saw it, a small homestead nestled in a shallow dip, sheltered from the worst of the wind by a stand of gnarled cottonwoods. It was not much, a sod house, built with a neatness that spoke of painstaking effort. A small, sturdy-looking corral holding a single horse, a patch of turned earth that would be a garden in the spring. A thin curl of smoke rose from a stone chimney, a fragile signal of life in the vast emptiness. He knew with a certainty that settled deep in his gut that this was the place. Only a person of immense and quiet fortitude could carve such a life out of this unforgiving land. It was the home of a woman who did not break. He urged his horse forward, the slow, deliberate pace feeling like a walk to the gallows. He was not afraid of a fight. He was afraid of her silence. He was afraid of the quiet judgment in her eyes, a judgment he now knew he had thoroughly earned. He rode into the small, tidy yard and dismounted. The air was still. The only sound was the sighing of the wind through the dry cottonwood leaves. The door to the sod house opened. Elara Vance stepped out. She was thinner than he remembered, and the sun had weathered her face, but she stood as straight as ever. She held a heavy iron skillet in one hand, not as a weapon, but as a thing she had been in the middle of using. Her eyes, those same stormy gray eyes, found his, and he saw a flicker of recognition, but no surprise. It was as if she had been expecting this day to come, sooner or later. She did not speak. She simply stood on her threshold, waiting. The silence stretched, thick and heavy. Caleb took off his hat, holding the dusty felt brim in his hands. His own hands were raw at the knuckles from the cold and the rains. He could feel the weight of that year of injustice between them. "Miss Vance," he said. His voice was hoarse, rough with disuse. She gave a small, almost imperceptible nod. It was an acknowledgement, nothing more. "My name is Caleb Thorne," he went on, feeling the foolishness of the words. Of course she knew his name. I was the sheriff in redemption. He had to say it. He had to claim the title that gave his failure its shape. She still said nothing. She just watched him, her gaze steady and assessing. He saw now what he had been blind to before. He saw the strength in her, not a loud or aggressive strength, but something quiet and deep, like a well that never runs dry. It was the strength of quiet competence, of an integrity that did not depend on the opinions of others. "I came here to tell you I was wrong," he said, the words coming out stark and unadorned. "About what happened, about you." The truth came out, about Jedediah Croft. He waited for a reaction. Anger, bitterness, even a bitter satisfaction. He saw none of it. Her expression remained unchanged, her eyes holding his. It was unnerving. He felt as if she were looking right through the words, into the man speaking them. She was taking his measure. "The truth usually does," she said finally. Her voice was low and even, without a tremor of emotion. It was as calm as the vast, empty landscape around them. "I know it's not enough," Caleb said, feeling a familiar frustration with the inadequacy of language. "Words don't fix what was done. They don't give you back the year you lost, or your good name." "My name was never lost to me," she said, and the simple declaration struck him with the force of a physical blow. Of course, her integrity was internal. It had not been up for a vote. Only to others. He had no answer for that. He stood there a penitent in a dusty coat, feeling the full weight of his foolish miles-long journey. He had come to offer her something, a restoration of her name, and she was telling him, in her quiet way, that it had never been his to give back. He looked around the small homestead. He was a man who understood the world through work, through the tangible realities of split rails and square nails. He saw the corner of the sod roof where the winter melt had clearly caused a leak, marked by a darker patch of earth. He saw the well pulley, its axle worn dangerously thin. He saw a woodpile that was sufficient, but not abundant enough for the coming deep winter. He looked back at her. "The apology stands," he said. "But it's a poor thing on its own. I see you have work that needs doing. Your well pulley is about to give out. That roof needs patching before the first heavy snow." He paused, forcing himself to meet her gaze. "I'm asking your permission to stay a few days, to make some small repair for the damage I caused." It was the only other currency he had, the work of his hands, a practical atonement. Elara Vance looked from his face to the well, then to the roof of her small house. Her taking stock eyes saw the truth in his words. The work did need doing. A lone woman could manage, had managed. But the help of a capable man was a different thing altogether. She looked at his hands, calloused and competent. They were not the hands of a man accustomed to shuffling papers. They were the hands of a man who knew his way around an axe and a hammer. She considered him for a long moment. He was offering a trade, his labor for her forgiveness. Or if not forgiveness, then at least a hearing. It was a more honest offer than mere words. "The horse can be watered at the trough," she said, turning to go back inside. "There's a lean-to behind the house you can use. I expect a man who can see a worn pulley knows how to use a bucksaw. The woodpile needs attention first." She went inside, leaving the door slightly ajar. It was not forgiveness. It was not welcome. But it was not a refusal. Caleb put his hat back on his head and led his horse to the trough. It was a beginning. The days that followed fell into a quiet, steady rhythm. Caleb was a man who knew how to work, and he threw himself into it with a kind of desperate focus. He was not just splitting wood or patching a roof. He was trying to build a bridge across the chasm of his own failure. Each swing of the axe, each carefully placed shingle, was a word in a conversation he did not know how to have. He started with the woodpile. He worked from dawn until the light began to fail, the rhythmic thud of the axe a constant sound in the small valley. He felled 2 dead cottonwoods, limbed them, and sawed them into rounds. He split them with a steady, efficient motion, stacking the wood in neat, tight rows against the side of the house. The pile grew from a modest supply into a formidable bulwark against the coming winter. Elara watched him from the window of her small home as she worked. She watched the economy of his movements, the way he never wasted emotion. He was not a lazy man, nor a beaten one. He was a man with a purpose, and he moved like it. She said little to him. In the morning, she would leave a tin plate of biscuits and jerky on the porch railing for him. In the evening when he was done, she would leave a bucket of hot water for him to wash. They were small practical gestures, a language of necessity they both understood. After 3 days the woodpile was done. Caleb moved on to the well pulley. He was resourceful. Using a piece of seasoned oak he found in her small pile of scrap lumber and the tools from his own saddle roll. He carved a new wheel, smooth and perfectly grooved. He reinforced the frame and rehung the bucket. When he was finished, the rope moved with a silent, easy grace. Elara came out to test it. She pulled the rope, and the bucket rose from the depths of the well without the familiar groan and shudder of the old pulley. She looked at the new wheel, at the careful, precise workmanship. She looked at Caleb, who stood a few feet away, his face smudged with dirt. "It's good work," she said. "It'll hold," he replied. It was the most they had said to each other in days. The brief exchange felt significant, a small crack in the wall of silence between them. That evening, for the first time, she did not leave his food on the porch. When he came to the door, weary and sore, she opened it. "Supper is on the table," she said, and stepped aside to let him in. The inside of the sod house was as neat and practical as the outside. It was a single room, but she had made it a home. A small stone fireplace provided heat, a sturdy table, and 2 chairs sat in the middle of the room, and a bed with a patchwork quilt was tucked into one corner. Everything was clean and well tended. It was the space of a person who respected herself and her surroundings. They ate in silence. The food was simple, a stew of rabbit and root vegetables, but it was hot and filling. The quiet was not hostile anymore. It was becoming something else, something shared. It was the quiet of 2 people who had little use for idle chatter. After the meal, as he sat nursing a cup of hot, bitter coffee, she finally spoke of the past. Her voice was as calm and factual as if she were describing the weather. "Jedediah Croft offered me a job clerking in his store 2 winters ago," she began. "I needed the work. My husband had died the spring before. A fever. He was a good man, a carpenter. We were saving to buy our own piece of land." Caleb listened, his gaze fixed on the steam rising from his cup. He did not interrupt. He knew this was a story that needed to be told on its own terms. "I worked for him for nearly a year. I saw things. Discrepancies in the ledgers. Goods that were marked as sold but never left the storeroom. He was a man who liked to live well, better than the store's profits should have allowed." She paused, her hands resting on the wooden table. "I believe he knew that I saw it. I never said a word, but he was a nervous man beneath all his bluster. He saw a threat where there was none, so he made one." She laid out the facts of her framing with the same dispassionate clarity. How Croft had claimed a cash box was missing from the safe, a box only he and she had the key for. How he had produced a witness, a drifter, who swore he had seen her near the store late at night. How a small portion of the stolen money was found tucked away in her small rented room, planted there by Croft himself. It was a neat and tidy story, she concluded, looking at him directly for the first time. And the town was eager to believe it. Caleb finally looked up, meeting her eyes. "I was eager to believe it," he said, his voice low and gravelly with shame. "A simple crime, a simple solution. It was easier than looking too closely at a man like Jedediah Croft, a man who held half the town's debt in his ledger." He shook his head slowly. "That's no excuse, it's just the reason. And it's a poor one." He had come expecting to give an apology, but he found himself giving a confession of his own moral laziness. She considered his words, her head tilted slightly. "You came all this way," she said. It was not a question, but a statement of fact she was examining. "Why? Because leaving a wrong to stand is like letting a wound fester," he said. "It poisons everything. I couldn't wear the badge anymore, knowing I had used it to serve a lie." He hesitated, then added, "And because I couldn't forget the way you looked at me that day." A faint color rose in her cheeks, like a lamp being turned up slowly. It was the first sign of vulnerability he had seen in her. "I thought you were a better man," she said, her voice soft but clear. "That's all." The simple, honest words cut him deeper than any accusation could have. He had not lived up to the quiet expectation of a stranger. It was a profound and humbling indictment. The next day he started on the roof. The work was slow and meticulous. He cut new sod from the creek bed, shaping the blocks with care. He wove a new lattice of willow branches to support the weight, sealing every seam with a thick plaster of clay and grass. As he worked, he could feel her presence nearby. She brought him a canteen of water without him having to ask. She handed him the tools he needed before he knew he needed them. They were working together now, a silent team. The connection between them was not built with words. It was built with shared labor, with the quiet understanding of a task that needed doing. It was in the way he braced the ladder for her as she climbed up to hand him a block of sod. It was in the way she had a hot meal ready the moment he came down, his body aching with fatigue. It was a partnership forged in practicality, an intimacy of competence. One evening, after a long day on the roof, he found himself telling her about his own past. He spoke of his wife, Sarah, who had died of influenza 5 years earlier. He spoke of the silence she had left behind, a silence so thick it pressed against him like a second skin. After she was gone, the world seemed to be made of rules and laws, he said, staring into the fire. They were solid things, predictable. A man breaks the law, he faces the consequence. It was clean, it was simple. He looked over at Alara. I think I hid in that simplicity. It was easier than dealing with the messiness of people, of truth. He had been a man in retreat from life. His judgment of her had not been an act of malice, but an act of cowardice, an unwillingness to engage with a truth that was complicated and inconvenient. Grief does not leave, he thought. It just learns to share the house. He had not let it share. He had let it take over every room, leaving no space for grace or doubt. Alara listened, her hands busy mending a worn shirt. She did not offer platitudes or easy comfort. She offered him the respect of her quiet attention. When he was finished, she simply nodded. A person can get lost in their own grief, she said, forget how to see the world clearly. In that moment, he felt seen. She was not just the woman he had wronged. He was not just the man who had failed. They were two people, marked by loss, sitting together in a small house in the middle of a vast and empty land. And for the first time in a long time, neither of them felt entirely alone. The roof was finished. The homestead was secure, buttoned up tight for the winter. Caleb knew he had no more reason to stay. The work was done. The apology had been made, and in its own quiet way, accepted. He found himself manufacturing small tasks, rehanging a crooked corral gate, sharpening her axe and shovel, anything to delay his departure. The thought of riding away from this place, from her, left a hollow ache in his chest. This quiet life, this rhythm of honest work and shared silence, had begun to feel more like a home than any place he had been in years. He was oiling the leather on his saddle one afternoon when he saw the rider, a lone figure on the horizon, coming from the south. The rider was moving at a determined pace, not the easy lope of a friendly visitor. A knot of unease tightened in Caleb's stomach. This far out, unexpected visitors were rarely good news. He stood up, wiping his hands on a rag, and watched the rider approach. Alara came out of the house, a rifle held loosely in her hands. She stood beside him, her presence a solid, calming thing. As the rider drew closer, Caleb recognized him, Jedediah Croft. He was overdressed for the plains, his city coat and hat looking absurdly out of place. He rode a fine, expensive horse, but he sat it poorly, a sack of arrogance perched in the saddle. Croft pulled his horse to a halt a few yards away, his eyes darting from Alara to Caleb. A sneer twisted his lips when he saw the former sheriff. Well, well, Croft said, his voice oily with false bonhomie. Look what the wind blew in. I heard you'd left town, Thorne. Didn't figure you for a hired hand. Caleb did not rise to the bait. He stood his ground, his expression unreadable. What do you want, Croft? Croft's gaze shifted to Alara. I've come to speak with the lady. A business proposition. He dismounted, trying for an air of authority that he could not quite manage. He was a man accustomed to being feared in his own small town, and he was off balance out here. The vast, indifferent landscape seemed to diminish him. I have no business with you, Alara said, her voice flat and cold. Now, don't be hasty, Croft said, taking a step forward. I know things have been difficult. I've come to make amends. I've acquired the title to this section of land. Seems the railroad is looking to put a spur line through here. The land has become valuable. He smiled, a predator's grin. I'm prepared to offer you a fair price to move on, a generous price considering. Caleb saw the game immediately. Croft had ruined her once, and now he had come to profit from her exile. It was a cruelty so profound, so petty, it took his breath away. This land is not for sale, Alara said. Croft's smile faltered. Everything is for sale, my dear. I have the legal papers. You're a squatter. I can have you removed. But I'm a reasonable man. I'm offering you a chance to leave with something in your pocket. He took another step, his tone becoming threatening. Or you can leave with nothing. Again, Caleb moved then. It was not a large movement, just a single step that placed him directly between Croft and Elara. He did not raise his voice. He did not reach for the gun he still wore at his hip out of long habit. He simply stood there, a solid, immovable object. "She said the land is not for sale," Caleb said, his voice quiet but carrying the weight of absolute finality. Croft sputtered, his face turning red. "This is not your concern, Thorne. You're not the law here. You're nothing." "I'm a man standing on a piece of ground he's been working for the past week," Caleb said, "and I'm telling you to get back on your horse and ride away." The moral calculus was suddenly, blindingly clear. A year ago, he had stood by and let this man's lies destroy an innocent woman. He would not make that mistake again. This was the same test, presented in a different form, a chance to get it right. "I have the deed," Croft blustered, waving a piece of paper he pulled from his coat. "A piece of paper signed by a corrupt land agent in Cheyenne doesn't mean much out here," Caleb said, his eyes cold as chips of winter ice. "What matters out here is what a person builds, what they defend. This is her home. You are not welcome in it." He took a slow step toward Croft. "The people in Redemption know what you are, Jedediah. Your name is mud. You come here to the one person you wronged more than any other, and you try to profit from it again? There are some sins that don't wash away. You're looking at two people who know that better than anyone." Croft looked from Caleb's unyielding face to the rifle in Alara's steady hands. He saw no fear, no hesitation. He saw only two people who had found something to stand for, and they were standing for it right in front of him. His bluster evaporated, leaving behind the small, frightened man he was. He backed away, stumbling slightly. He pulled himself onto his horse, his movements clumsy and panicked. "You'll regret this," he snarled, but the threat was empty. It was the parting shot of a defeated bully. He wrenched his horse around and spurred it back the way he had come, a frantic, undignified retreat. Caleb and Elara stood together, watching until he was just a small, dark speck on the vast horizon. The silence that returned was clean and pure, washed of the filth Croft had brought with him. The external threat was gone. The past had finally been confronted and sent running. All that was left was the future, an unspoken question that hung in the air between them. That evening, the quiet in the small house was different. It was not the silence of caution or healing, but the silence of contemplation. The confrontation with Croft had changed something, solidified the unspoken bond that had grown between them. They had stood together, not as a lawman and a victim, but as partners. After they had finished their meal, Caleb did not leave. He stayed at the table, turning his coffee cup in his hands. The fire crackled in the hearth, casting long, dancing shadows on the walls. He looked across the table at Elara. The firelight softened the hard-won lines on her face, revealing the profound grace and resilience beneath. He had come here seeking to unburden his own conscience, to offer a clumsy apology for a past wrong. He had not expected to find a future. He had not expected to find a place and a person that felt like a destination. A place to stop. Elara, using her first name for the first time. It felt both strange and perfectly natural on his tongue. She looked up, her gray eyes meeting his. She was waiting. "When I came here," he began, choosing his words with care, "I was just a man looking to right a wrong. I thought that was the end of the story. I fixed your well. I patched your roof. The work is done." He took a breath. "But I find I'm not ready for the story to be over." He stood up and walked to the small window, looking out at the dark plains, vast and empty under a blanket of stars. "This is good land. It's hard, but it's honest. You've made a home here by yourself. You've built something that lasts." He turned back to face her. "I have been a man without a home for a long time. A man in motion, going nowhere. I've done more living in the past 2 weeks, working this piece of ground with you, than I have in the past 5 years. He walked back to the table and stood before her. This was the most important judgment he would ever deliver, the most honest declaration he would ever make. "I am not offering you my protection," he said, his voice steady and earnest. "You have proven you do not need it. I am not offering you my name to restore yours. You have shown me it was never tarnished. I am asking to add my strength to yours. I am asking you to let me build with you. I'm asking you to be my wife." The proposal hung in the quiet room. It was not a plea of passion, but a statement of fact. A practical offer, as solid and unadorned as a well-built fence. It was an offer of partnership, of shared work, and a shared future. Elara looked at him, her taking stock eyes searching his face. She saw no pity, no obligation, She saw a man who had faced his own failings and had chosen to be better. She saw a man whose quiet competence matched her own. He had ridden 500 miles to fix a mistake, and in doing so, had shown her the true measure of his character. A lesser man would have let the lie stand. A lesser man would have sent money. Caleb Thorne had brought himself. He had brought the honest labor of his hands. Her face remained serious, her gaze direct. She considered his words, weighed them as she would weigh seed for a spring planting. "A man who can admit he is wrong is a rare thing, Sheriff," she said, her voice low. "A man who rides across a territory to fix it, that is a man to build with." A small, slow smile touched her lips for the first time. It transformed her face, wiping away the last shadows of weariness and sorrow. "Yes, Caleb," she said, "I would want that." 2 years later, the homestead was no longer just a testament to one woman's survival, but a symbol of a shared life. A small, sturdy barn stood next to the corral. Built from cottonwood timber Caleb had hauled from the creek bed, miles away. The garden was larger, its neat rows pregnant with vegetables. A new room had been added to the sod house, its window looking out to the east, to catch the morning sun. In the late afternoon light, Caleb and Alara stood on the small porch, watching their son, a sturdy toddler with his mother's gray eyes, take clumsy, determined steps in the yard. Caleb's arm was around Alara's shoulders, a familiar, comfortable weight. Her hand rested on his arm. He was no longer Sheriff Thorne. He was just Caleb, a husband and a father. The badge he had once worn was packed away in a small wooden box. He had found a different kind of law to live by, a simpler, more profound code of loyalty, hard work, and love. He had come to this place a broken man, seeking to mend a wrong he had done to another. He had found, instead, the mending of himself. Ilora leaned her head against his shoulder, her gaze soft as she watched their child. She had been a woman banished, cast out into the wilderness to be forgotten. But in that solitude she had found her own unshakable strength. And then, impossibly, the man who had banished her had come seeking not to be forgiven, but to understand. He had seen her, not as a victim, but as a woman of substance and worth. In his quiet, steadfast atonement, he had offered her the one thing she thought she would never have again, a partner. They did not speak, they did not need to. The life they had built around them spoke for them. It spoke of second chances, of the quiet courage it takes to build a home and a future out of the broken pieces of the past. The vast, empty landscape no longer felt like a place of exile. It was simply the backdrop to their lives, its stark beauty a reflection of the hard-won peace they had found together. The greatest things in this life are often not found, but built. They are built slowly, deliberately, with worn hands and an honest heart. A home is not just a shelter from the storm, but a place where you are seen for who you truly are. And love, the truest kind of love, is sometimes a quiet conversation held over years of shared work. A silent understanding that the deepest apology is a life lived well beside the one you have wronged. It is the simple, profound act of choosing to stay and to build together.